I'm Father Michael Sparrow, a Jesuit Catholic priest, a filmmaker, and a survivor of sexual abuse. For the last 10 years, I've been researching the remarkable story you're about to watch, a story of courage, forgiveness, and reconciliation. This video begins by acknowledging that Cardinal Joseph Bernardin of Chicago made mistakes, serious mistakes, in not recognizing the devastation sexual abuse by a priest can cause. But once Bernardin saw what was happening, he became the first U.S. bishop to take significant measures to protect vulnerable youth and remove offending clergy from ministry. Ironically, Cardinal Bernardin was himself accused of sexual abuse by Stephen Cook, a former seminarian. Cook also named another priest in his suit. Eventually, Stephen Cook withdrew his accusation and Bernardin stood vindicated. But Cook's suit against the other priest went forward and was settled outside of court, with Stephen being awarded a cash payment. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. Cardinal Bernardin then sought out Stephen Cook to meet with him face to face on the Feast of the Holy Family, and they were reconciled. A most unusual friendship, rooted in a newfound trust, began to grow between these two men, and Stephen Cook returned to the Catholic Church. This is extraordinary. People who have been abused by clergy rarely, if ever, return to the Church, but Stephen Cook did, and therein lies the heart of hope in this story. The Catholic Church is not alone in this horrendous scandal of abuse of power, of cover-ups, of turning a blind eye to sin and crime. Within the last 10 years, we have seen the veil of denial ripped away, exposing sexual abuse in virtually every sector of society. Sadly, tragically, the list of abusers is all too familiar. But this is a story of courage. It's a story of what it takes to rebuild a fractured relationship. The Catholic Church and other religious, civic, and educational institutions have learned a lot in the last 25 years, and significant progress has been made. But clearly, more needs to be done. My hope is that this story of Cardinal Bernardin and Stephen Cook's reconciliation will inspire us, all of us, and our leadership and our institutions to do more, to do whatever is necessary to protect our youth, and to search out those who have been abused and go to whatever length it takes to help heal those wounds.
I was flabbergasted. I said, how could this be that such allegations of such charges were made?
Stars shine brightest in the darkest night. It has been said that the true measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in moments of challenge and controversy. That dark night arrived for Cardinal Joseph Bernardin of Chicago when, in November 1993, he was named in a $10 million lawsuit alleging that he and another priest sexually abused Stephen Cook, a young seminarian, while he was Archbishop of Cincinnati. It's hard to imagine today the shockwaves this sent around the country and around the world. Bernardin was arguably one of the most powerful and well-respected churchmen in America. Bernardin was the first Catholic cardinal to recognize the seriousness of the clergy sex abuse scandal, the first to put norms in place to safeguard youth. Since his accusation, several other cardinals have been implicated in either covering up the scandal or themselves accused of perpetrating abuse. But Bernardin was the first to be charged in modern times. The damage that sexual abuse by a priest does to the psyche of a young person is devastating. It can leave them scarred for life. With so many cases of sexual abuse by clergy being uncovered, why tell a story of a false accusation? Because this is a story of reconciliation between the accused and his accuser. It is a story of hope, of healing, of peace.
The big lesson I think we take from Cardinal Bernardin is the level of moral courage we need to have to tend our relationships of consequence and go to any length in order to experience reconciliation.
I was a witness to the kindness that he expressed to people on the street, people in parishes, the people at the office, and the courage to go through the experiences he had. The courage to be a young man in South Carolina, a minority, Italian and Catholic, to move through the priesthood. Someone who fought the battles at the Bishops' Conference, someone who led the church at a very crucial time when we look back, and someone who inherited a diocese that was in disarray. He was courageous. He wasn't ferocious, but he was courageous.
That courage would be put to the test as he slowly came to the awareness that a crisis was emerging that would shake the Catholic Church to its foundation.
There were allegations about priests who were abusing children, and that they were being moved from parish to parish. It was jaw-dropping. I couldn't believe it.
I was naive, as I think many of our bishops were. We weren't used to this. We weren't expecting anything like this. We just never thought that priests would do some of these things that we were hearing about.
The best medical advice and the best psychological advice that Catholic bishops and everyone in the world were getting up until about 1986 or 1987 was that pedophilia was a curable condition.
I think they really thought they could change the behavior of these men. And that's why, we get criticized because we put them back in a parish. Well, we did it with the advice of the professionals.
It was only in the mid to late 1980s that the balance of medical and psychological opinion shifted. But up until that time, and this is one of the hardest things to remember from where we are today now that we know so much, but up until that time, no one inside the church or outside the church knew that we were dealing with a pattern of behavior that was going to repeat itself and was going to further victimize young people.
Was he the giant on sexual abuse at the beginning? Of course not, because that was what everyone was doing, was moving priests.
But in 1991, there was a case of a priest in Chicago who had been found to be abusing minors. There was a meeting at the parish that was attended by archdiocesan officials who mentioned in the course of that meeting that it was not the first allegation against this particular priest. The outcry from that parish, this has happened before, why was it allowed to happen again? Very natural, and we can certainly understand it today. That outcry provoked Cardinal Bernardin to understand there was something that we should pay attention to here.
This kind of a case, when it was a priest that had failed in his duty, this got to him.
Our mistake again was, in the beginning at least, we did not notify the parishioners at large. And, looking back on it now, it was wrong.
I think, unfortunately, whether it's in government, whether it's in the church hierarchy, everyone's in their tents, unwilling to bend. and afraid that folks will perceive them as made an error, made a mistake. I don't have as much power as I want to have. And if perhaps we all took a pause and said, wait a second, let's go back to 25 years ago and remember what Cardinal Bernardin did.
And he said, I know this is a problem, and I have to do something about it. I don't know the details. I can't tell you what we're going to do right now, but I'm going to look at this boldly.
Over the course of 12 months that followed, he formed a commission here in the Archdiocese of Chicago to study the problem and to determine the best way that the church should handle the problem.
Bernardin put together a blue ribbon commission of an esteemed woman judge and a respected businessman, chaired by Bishop Gorman, a clinical psychologist and vicar general for the Archdiocese.
So the three of us spent a year interviewing all the best psychiatrists and psychologists around the country. We read everything we could. It was the whole idea of trying to find out what is this sexual abuse. And we then established our program for the Archdiocese of how to handle these cases that came up.
Before that committee submitted its report to the Cardinal a year later, even before then, the Archdiocese removed 22 priests from active ministry who had credible allegations against them. And one of the outcomes of that was that every priest in the Archdiocese of Chicago, everyone working in the Chancery downtown, became a mandatory reporter, required to report every allegation of sexual abuse to prosecutors and criminal authorities.
Sexual violation of children is not merely a sin, it's a crime. It's a crime.
I think that my policy, which is one of the most rigid policies of any diocese, is an indication and is proof, really, of my tremendous concern for the victims of sexual abuse on the part of priests.
The tragedy of it is that he tried in 1992 and 1993 to take this model that had been developed in Chicago to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and to try to say at that time, long before the disclosures about the Archdiocese of Boston in 2002, tried to urge the bishops of the United States to adopt this model.
Cardinal Bernardin brought a copy of our report to the Bishops' Conference and put it on the chair of 300 bishops.
Well, it was very strange, because the person that fought him the most was a cardinal from the East Coast, Bernard Cardinal Law. And he did it under the guise that bishops' conferences do not have the right to mandate a diocese to do anything. And so the bishops did not vote that in. Many bishops, I believe, used the protocol, but some did not. And some got into trouble later on. And the one who got into the most trouble and lost his position was Cardinal Law.
Honestly, it was astonishing to me that the bishops wouldn't see that and be grateful that there was a process, that was already moving along and had some experience, because Chicago cases were among the earliest. I'm sad to say.
Cardinal Bernardin had been in New York City delivering the Thomas Merton Lecture at Columbia University when word began to circle around the United States through chanceries and out of media outlets that an American cardinal was going to be accused of sexual abuse.
At about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he called me and said, the allegation is against me. I was in shock. I didn't know what to say.
Initially, they only had a first name, and eventually they came to understand the full name of the person and who he was, Stephen Cook, who had been a seminarian at St. Gregory's in Cincinnati. Cardinal Bernardin racked his memory, couldn't even remember who this person was.
He called and said, Marianne, I'm shocked. I had no idea. I don't know what this is about. I don't know why people are saying this. And our newsroom was abuzz. I mean, we had meetings going on in a conference room. Do we do the story? Do we not do the story? We had spoken to our lawyers. But once he did call back, we thought, okay, he has responded. We do need to report that this is about to happen.
The Cardinal wrote in his wonderful book, The Gift of Peace, the small little journal he wanted the people of the Archdiocese to have after his death. And at one point he says, the next morning, Friday, November 12th, the allegations against me were the lead story in the press of almost every large city in the world. As I prayed the rosary early in the morning, I meditated on the first of the sorrowful mysteries, the agony in the garden. I said to the Lord, in all my 65 years, this is the first time that I've really understood the pain and agony you felt that night. And I also asked, why did you let this happen? I had never felt more alone. I felt a deep humiliation as inquiring callers made it clear that the accusation had now circled the world, that millions of people would know only one thing about me, that I was charged with abusing the trust and the body of a minor almost 20 years before.
It was just, now what? How do you prove innocence? It's difficult enough to prove guilt. It's very difficult to prove innocence.
He knew he was not guilty. He knew that nothing had ever happened. And so the next morning at a cabinet meeting and administrative team, he decided that he would speak to the press.
The press conferences were held on the first floor of the pastoral center, and it was very moving for the staff that day. There was silence in the elevator as the Cardinal and Sister Mary Bryan went down. They stepped out of the elevator. It was an ugly old back entrance where all the trucks empty their stuff. And as they stepped out, the Cardinal turned to Sister Bryan and asked her to pray with him. He was worried about whether the people would be scandalized. Fortified by that prayer, he faced the press.
Everything that is in that suit about me, the allegations are totally untrue. They're totally false.
After this simple defense, the Cardinal, against the advice of his lawyers and some staff, said he would take questions. And the early questions were harsh.
I have already submitted this incident, this allegation, to our review board, and they will follow the normal process.
Colonel, these are obviously very personal questions here, but have you ever engaged in any type of sexual activity as a priest or as a cardinal?
I'm 65 years old, and I can tell you that all my life I have lived a chaste and celibate life.
Hindsight says that that particular reporter probably did the Cardinal a great favor that day by asking that question.
Later, he found out why the allegation was being made. Basically, the Archdiocese of Cincinnati did not handle a sexual abuse case as they should have. And the person who was abused wanted to raise it, wanted to be heard, wanted his voice to be heard.
What also seemed to be the case was there were people in the United States and in the church who were trying to press an argument about something else. And for them, what was important was to discredit someone like Cardinal Bernardin.
They really tried to destroy him. I don't think they did, but they really did try.
He had strength. And he wasn't a strong man, but he had strength, the inner core of his self. He knew who he was.
He spoke to the reporters for 48, 72, whatever. I mean, it was a week, I guess, of everywhere he went, he was followed by a group of reporters here in Chicago, then in Washington, D.C. when he went to the Bishops' Conference, back to Chicago. There were the early morning reporters that are up early for the early morning news. There were the afternoon reporters. There were the nighttime reporters for the 10 o'clock news. And he stopped every single time and had the same thing to say.
He said, it's false. This is false. I did not do this. And I want to clear my name. And he wanted to do it publicly.
His defense was, I didn't do this.
Lie was not one of his defense mechanisms.
I'd like to get through this, get over this as quickly as possible. It's better to resolve something like this quickly. Furthermore, the gentleman who brought the suit against me has AIDS, and we don't know how much longer he will live.
In terms of reaching out to Stephen Cook in the earliest phases of the accusation during those 100 days, Cardinal Bernardin was somewhat restrained by the fact that there was a civil lawsuit, and under the policies of the Archdiocese of Chicago, he had reported himself to law enforcement. So there was an ongoing criminal investigation as well. He was restrained from reaching out to Stephen Cook, his accuser, simply by those facts.
I have a great deal of compassion for him. He has AIDS, I'm told. I'm a pastor, I'm a priest, and I would like to pray with him, and I would like to give him comfort.
And yet the desire to forgive and the ability to forgive are two different things. Forgiveness is a process. For all of us, it takes time for our emotions to catch up with the deepest desires of our heart.
He was telling us how he had a difficult time sleeping. Sometimes it would be the crow on the fence at 3 o'clock in the morning. What will happen? Will this have to go to court? Will there be litigation? Will I be believed? Even though this man was innocent, and 99% of the people in Archdiocese knew that he was going through this ordeal for nothing, he was suffering.
I think it's a mark of the grace with which Cardinal Bernardin dealt with the false allegation that he didn't live that grief publicly.
Was this what the Lord had been preparing for me? To face false allegations about something I knew never took place? Spurious charges, I realized, were what Jesus himself experienced. But this evolving nightmare seemed completely unreal. It did not seem possible this was happening to me.
Came into my room one night after dinner, and he sat down, he said, in a deep sense of hurt and confusion, he said, "Jack, do you ever think we'll ever get out of this? Will this ever go away?" So he was living with that quiet depression, because it was just sitting, wasn't going anyplace. He could living with it.
I think forgiveness is often internal. It starts there. You think, okay, can I forgive someone for what has happened? And you initially, maybe it's just me, think, no way. I can't. What happened? Oh my gosh, no way could I do that. But if we look to how he did it, in not just forgiveness within, he did it in front of the world.
He was deeply hurt and confused about then what, where do you go? But determined not to live in sorrow, not to live in revenge.
He didn't take that suffering and turn it into anger against Stephen Cook. All through that time, we have to pray for Stephen Cook. We have to pray for those who have been abused. We have to pray that be a just settlement to this. He showed them the grace. He showed them the stuff of which he was made, and it was good.
That was the thing that was such a lesson to me. Immediately, he was forgiving. He didn't strike out. I don't ever remember him being angry.
He truly loved our Lord, and I think he was simply following the example of our Lord. He was forgiven. But he knew, this is what I want to do, this is what the Lord would do, and he did it.
And as time went on, it unfolded. As time went on, they saw that there wasn't much there. People worked with Stephen Cook, and eventually, after a few months, the case dissolved.
Since I cannot be sure my memories of abuse by the Cardinal are accurate, I can no longer proceed in good conscience. I have therefore dismissed all claims against Cardinal Bernardin.
I'm very, very grateful that I have been vindicated by a total and voluntary dismissal of the charges brought against me.
But the suit against the other accused priest went forward. The Archdiocese of Cincinnati eventually settled out of court with Stephen Cook for an undisclosed amount of money.
I harbor no ill feelings toward Stephen Cook. I have compassion for him. I have prayed for him every day, and I will continue to do so.
This is what caught my attention in terms of how we were reflecting on the processes of forgiveness. That could have been let go at that time. Stephen had publicly recanted. It could have all ended. But the cardinal picks it up.
Remember the scene in the prison when John Paul met the one who was trying to assassinate him? That was vivid in the cardinal's mind. That was vivid in the life of the church at that time. That was a profound moment of mercy, reconciliation, forgiveness. I think the cardinal wanted to model that and meet this person who had accused him.
It was kind of beautiful that he wanted to reconcile with Stephen and made the trip out there to see him. And I mean, I think that says a lot about the cardinal, that he wasn't going to hold it against Stephen.
What impressed me was that the cardinal had this deep sense that to complete the whole experience of forgiveness, he needed to see Stephen. He needed to sit with him. That something had happened that deeply wounded the cardinal, and Stephen was involved with it.
Reconciliation, the Latin word concilium is the Latin word for the eyelash, the eyelash. And reconciliation is when people who are apart from each other then we have a face-to-face relationship, eyelash to eyelash. That's what reconciliation is. Forgiveness is the motivation and the decision. Reconciliation are by you go through the stages of establishing the relationship as face-to-face again.
And it was a thing that had to be negotiated very delicately, to reach out in such a way that it could be private, that it would not seem in any way exploitative or to be taking advantage or seem somehow like a victory lap. So the meeting had to take place so far off the radar, it wasn't on anyone's schedule. It was, I think, a privately chartered flight, so that it could be done quietly and so that it could be done respectfully.
On the Feast of the Holy Family, that meeting took place at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Philadelphia. Stephen Cook's companion and friend, Kevin, was there with Stephen, and he explains what took place.
They shook hands, they sat and they looked face to face on the sofa, and we both sat. Cardinal Bernardin said to Stephen, "I need to know from you, do you still believe that I participated in this?" And Stephen looked at him and said, "No." And Stephen apologized. Cardinal Bernardin was very compassionate, understanding, let Stephen know, and I don't blame you one bit. But he wasn't angry at Stephen, and he let Stephen know that.
I think Cardinal Bernardin's greatest hope was not only to bring peace and reconciliation to close out this conflict over the false allegation, but finally, I think what he wanted most was to be a minister of grace to bring peace and reconciliation to Stephen Cook, a thing that seems to have happened.
I have thought that this story, the reconciliation between Cardinal Bernardin and Stephen Cook, has never received the focus it needs to receive, because you see the length to which we must go.
He said, "Stephen, I really want to say Mass with you." I think that was a moment of reconciliation. The body of Christ, the blood of Christ.
If you're unable to accomplish that, that unhealed relationship is just always there.
That was very important for the cardinal to hear, that Stephen was not just reconciled with the cardinal, but was reconciled with God.
After the reconciliation with Stephen Cook, he lived another year. And during that year, the cardinal was diagnosed with cancer.
I don't know anything about physical reaction to such trauma as he went through. But I have since wondered if that could have had any kind of impact on his health, because so quickly the cancer appeared, and he had been a healthy man, through all these years, and he was healthy and then this occurred.
There was a scene where news cameras were filming the cardinal going into the hospital for surgery. And they said, I heard the voice, did the Pope call you? Did the Pope call you? The Cardinal was walking away to go into Loyola University Medical Center, and he turns around and he comes back to the microphone. And Cardinal Bernardin says, "No, but Stephen Cook called me this morning."
This was a transformational moment in terms of the story that the Cardinal had with Stephen Cook.
And again, it was this glimpse, this window opens to what a reconciled relationship looks like. That he would even mention his name again and say that, "Oh, Stephen Cook called me this morning," was a powerful witness.
When I received the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, his was one of the first letters. He had only a few months to live, and he wrote it, filled with sympathy and encouragement for me. That was very important for the Cardinal, because it was full reconciliation. Here was someone who made an allegation. Here was someone whom the Cardinal met face to face, forgave, and here the Cardinal was suffering from pancreatic cancer, and one who was suffering serious illness himself reached out.
Stephen Cook died in September 1995 at the age of 36. The man who said he hated the Catholic Church because of the abuse he had suffered at the hands of another priest died at peace, fully reconciled to the Catholic Church.
As Cardinal Bernardin said to Stephen, in all families, there are disappointments and misunderstandings. There are fractures, woundedness, tremendous hurts. At the same time, if we are to be sisters and brothers, if we are to be a family, we work through them and we allow God's grace to flow through us. And then we together create the new future.
After his death, Cardinal Bernardin's picture graced the cover of Newsweek magazine, reminding all of us that the lessons of forgiveness bear fruit in the gift of peace.
You know, many people have asked me why I'm at peace, or how I can be at peace. And first of all, you have to put yourself totally in the hands of the Lord. Secondly, you have to begin seeing death not so much as an enemy, but as a friend. And thirdly, you have to begin letting go. And if you can do those three things, then you experience peace.